It looks like it's starting to form a little crack. This isn't good. This steel is so soft. Hey, it's Nolan here. In today's video, I'm going to be forging this horseshoe into 2 separate knives. The gentleman who ordered these knives from me wants them to be identical, so this is the profile I drew up, and I'm going to have to cut this into 2 pieces so that I can get the 2 separate knives. Before I start forging it, I got to remove some of these nails that are still stuck in it. Look how old these things must be. They're all eroded. Now that I've got that done, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut it in half. But I've got to be very careful when I do that because I want these knives to be identical. So if I get one of them longer than the other, then the knives aren't going to turn out right. So hopefully I can do this the first try. This is a rare thing for me. I'm whipping out the ruler. Okay, this thing didn't really help me. I'm just going to do the best I can at eyeballing it. And hopefully, if anything goes wrong, I can fix it later. It looks like this side's a little bit longer naturally, so I'm going to offset it just a little bit. That way they're both pretty even with each other. Let me stop you right here. Pay close attention to those sparks. These will have a huge factor in something to find out later. But notice how the sparks are long and orange, and they aren't bright, and they don't explode like the sparks off high carbon steel. All right, let's see how we did. All right, well, that is very close. That is not as bad as I thought it would be. We can definitely work with this. Let's go ahead and get the forge lit. While the forge is heating up, I'm going to explain a little bit about how I'm going to forge these. You can see here on the sides, the thickest part is up here. And also, there's no holes for nails on this side. So this is the area I'm going to forge the blade out of. And we're probably going to start forging the bevels that are around here so that I can draw out the knife long enough to avoid those nail holes down here. We don't want those in the blade. So that's what we're going to do. First things first, I'm just going to wire brush it to clean up that steel a little bit. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to flatten this out a little bit so I can get some more length to it. This isn't good. See here on the top of that part right there, there's a little bit of a crack showing up. On the other side, that's from where I believe it's called a clip of the horseshoe was, and that looks like it's starting to form a little crack. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to grind that out and make sure that we can salvage this. Okay, that was extremely unfortunate. I had to grind away a lot of material to see how thin it is now to make sure that that crack is fully gone. Now I'm going to start forging in that tip. I'm going to forge it down to start. That way when I forge in the bevels, it'll swoop itself right back up. Alright, so what I'm finding out is these horseshoes, they like to be forged really hot. Otherwise they'll start splitting apart and cracking. That could be because of the really old material. And definitely is really soft. It moves very easily under the hammer. So I'm using a really light hammer for this. So for this build, I'm going to have to make sure to keep the temperature really high. Alright, I got this sort of little preform put in. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start forging in the bevels. This should help curve that tip back up and thin down my edge. Actually, I changed my mind. I'm going to start shaping the handle first. Because right now, because it's curved, it's hard to hold in my tongs, so forging the bevels would be more difficult. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to straighten the handle out just a bit so that I can hold it better in my tongs. Alright, I got the handle all shaped to where I want it to be. Now I'm going to go ahead and start forging in the bevels. Alright, now I'm going to use this little part of the crossbeam hammer to help draw out that width I want on my heel. Another little crack is starting to form near the tip. See that? I'm going to have to go grind that off too. To start shaping this knife, I'm going to be using this really light, like 1.5 pound hammer that I forged out myself a few weeks ago. Now I'm using the horn of my anvil to bend that whole blade downwards a little bit. It also helps refine the choil right there for your finger. All right, here's how we're currently looking. As you can see, if I can get it over the top, we are very close to the profile. So I think all they have to do left is get this thing good and straight, and then we can start normalizing it and start on the other. All right, we've got that pretty straight there. Check from both sides. Gotta touch up the bevel just a little bit. There we go. Now let's check from the other side. I think this guy is done. I'm gonna let him cool off and then we can take it to the grinding room. All right, here's how both knives are looking after forging. Despite our best efforts, both knives are 2 different sizes. However, that's not a big deal. We'll be able to grind them to the exact same size. While I'm grinding, I like to tell y'all what kind of belts I'm using, and this one is a worn down 36 grit belt. I typically use a worn belt in all my knives when I'm grinding them to shape, and this way I can push hard on them and not really care about messing them up. But when I grind bevels, I always use a new or at least sharp belt so I can get clean, even grinds. Now I can tell y'all a little more on the backstory of this project. So the client reached out after seeing my previous video on making a horseshoe knife, and he wondered if I could make 2 for him out of a really cool material that he had. He found 2 horseshoes in his great-grandfather's hunting cabin that was set up in the mountains. Alright, got the 2 knives all ground out to their profiles. They're looking really nice. And the next thing to do is grind the bevels. Now I forged in a distal taper, and they're pretty flat on the faces, so it shouldn't be too bad. My client's great-grandfather sadly passed away around 1925, and that makes these horseshoes incredibly old. 100 years old would be the bare minimum, and I guarantee they're much older than that, possibly even from the 1800s. A distal taper, like I mentioned earlier, is where the blade starts out thick towards the handle and gets thinner all the way towards the tip. The reason I do this is because it greatly increases the cutting ability of any knife by making it thinner, but it also keeps its strength by leaving the handle area that receives the most stress strong. The further I kept grinding on these knives, I noticed something terrible. These little inclusions started popping up all over, and if you've worked with knives before, that could only mean one thing: cracks. So I was panicking, trying to figure out where I went wrong. Did I forge it too cold? Did I pick the wrong area to forge the blade from? Or was the steel just straight bad? All of these could have been a huge possibility, but then I got thinking, and I was thinking about the time period that these came from, and what a commonly used material from then was, and sure enough, with a quick Google search, we got our answer. And to make sure that theory was right, there's only one sure way I could test this, and that was with acid. And to my surprise, this material is in fact wrought iron. And that is super cool. Wrought iron, when etched, it has a super cool, almost Damascus-like pattern on it. Due to it being mainly iron, it has a lot more of a grain structure like wood, rather than a crystalline structure like normal knife-making steel. Okay, with that all sorted out now that we know these are wrought iron, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in a little sharpening choil on each of these knives. Since these are made out of wrought iron, this steel is so soft. The files just go right through them like butter. It's like my homemade file handle. Now I'm going to take a Dremel and I'm going to go along in here inside the handle where the belt grinder can't reach, and I'm going to get that all smoothed out. Alright, I got both of these knives all cleaned up. They're looking really nice. And now it's time for everybody's favorite part of knife making, time to hand sand. Since both these knives are wrought iron, they should be really soft, and the hand sanding shouldn't take long at all. But I do have to take them to a pretty high grit so that I can ensure the edge comes out really nice on them. I got my little hand sanding jig set up. It's my machinist vise clamped in my regular bench vise. This way I have easier access to sand the knives on both sides. Alright, I'm going to be starting at 220 grit sandpaper. And then after this, I'm going to go up to 400. The last grit I went to on the belt grinder was 220 grit. So that's the same I'm using in the sandpaper. And since it was a machine finish, it's going to be a little bit finer than the sandpaper. So this should honestly be really quick to do the 220 grit. Alright, so I finished at 220 grit. And now when I move on to 400 grit, I'm going to sand it in a diagonal at first. That way, I can ensure that I've removed all of the 220 grit scratches from underneath it. So you can see those 400 grits going sideways now. So I'm going to do that on the whole blade. And then I can finish it off by going straight again. Alright, after a while hand sanding, I got it finished to 600 grit. And I took a lot of time to be careful to get all the grind lines out of inside the plunge lines, so that they're all nice and clean now. And now I'm going to go ahead and buff it so we can get a nice mirror finish on her. Real quick though, before I go buff it, I've got to make sure that I get all of the grind lines nice and even inside the handles. Because when your spine isn't really even and you don't hand sand it, you can kind of tell. And hand sanding it just makes it pop and just makes your quality look a little bit better. All right, here's how they're looking after the first buffing wheel. And this is just the first grit. This was just to remove my hand staining scratches. So the next one is what's gonna actually polish these. So this is where things are gonna really step up and they're gonna get really shiny. Well, after a couple hours of hand sanding and then buffing, I got a perfect mirror finish on these guys. And now you see all those little splotches? That's actually the grain of the raw iron. This mirror finish is pretty much flawless. There's no grind lines left in there. So everything you see, that's all the raw iron. So when I etch this, this is gonna look really nice. That being said, I'm gonna go ahead and scrub these down with dish soap, get all the greases off them, and I'm gonna etch them in ferric chloride. All right, I got them cleaned really good. I got my ferric chloride. I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna dip the knives in, and I'm gonna leave them in there for around 2 minutes on the first etch. All right, it's been 2 minutes. I have not looked at these yet, so I'm really curious to see. Oh yeah, that is gonna look cool. I'm gonna rinse it off. And it's really important to sand off all these oxides. So I'm gonna use some 2500 grit to sand down the oxides. All right, after getting the oxides all sanded back off, we're gonna go back into the acid for another 2 minutes. All right, so we got a pretty cool looking etch on these guys. You can see they have sort of a topography now, which is kind of like a 3D map. You can feel the different textures where the metal was etched away by the acid, but it's still shiny. So now I'm gonna mix up a recipe of some instant coffee, and that should be able to bring out the nice pattern in our steel. I got some boiling water here. I'm gonna add this into my jar. We're gonna fill it up just enough so that the knives can sit down in there all the way and the water will cover it all. And then we're just gonna add out copious amounts of instant coffee. Way more than you would do if you're just gonna drink it, because we want this to etch the steel pretty deeply. After getting that mixed up real good, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna add in my knives. Now, these are gonna soak in for a long time. Anywhere from like 4 to 8 hours. I'm gonna check it around the 2 hour mark to see where we're sitting, and I'll bring y'all back to see that. Okay, I'm inside now. I went to the gym and came back, so it's been a few hours since these knives have been in there. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna rinse off all the coffee. Oh yeah, that etch looks really cool. It might be a little hard to tell on the camera, but there's like a light golden brown stain on the top of these from the coffee. So to fix that, I'm gonna take this little microfiber jewelry buffing cloth and I'm gonna try to just buff the knives a little bit, see if that helps. Well, both of them, they got a nice etch on them. They're still shiny, which I think is really cool. And raw iron is so unique. It looks slightly like Damascus, but it's not uniform at all. And you can definitely tell it's very organic, and I think that's really cool. One of the very last steps I'm going to do on these knives is I'm going to give them a really nice protective coating of beeswax. But before I do that, I'm going to wire wheel all of the scale off of these so that they're nice and shiny too. These wheels are only slightly terrifying. Well, that wasn't too bad. All right, to melt the wax onto these, I'm gonna heat these up super slightly. Just hit it really quickly so that the beeswax will melt right onto the surface. Just like that. I'm gonna heat these back up a little bit to liquefy it. And hopefully I can rub it fast enough to not burn myself. See how it's all clumped up there on the back? Fix this, I just heat it up a bit. And while it's still liquid, I just spread it out really quickly. And then that way, when it dries, it'll be nicely coated and it won't clump up into those big little portions. And the last thing to do is sharpen them. And yes, these knives are raw iron, so the steel is incredibly soft and they will never hold an edge, but I'm still gonna sharpen them because why not? Like, say if you wanted to open a letter or something, these could definitely do that. So we're gonna put a quick edge on them. To keep with the super old theme, I'm gonna be using some of my great grandfather's old Arkansas whetstones. I got a burr on both sides, so I flipped over to the less aggressive stone. Since these knives are such soft steel, that burr is just gonna keep rolling from side to side with the stone that I was just using. So I'm gonna use this ultra fine stone. Like, it's so smooth, it feels like it wouldn't do anything. But hopefully with this, I can slowly get that burr refined enough to get something that's relatively sharp. Before I bought my real Japanese whetstones, this was the finishing stone that I use on all of my knives, and it gets things razor sharp. So I'm hoping that it can do a good job on this knife. Since this steel is so soft, I'm gonna have to strop the heck out of these to see if I can get rid of that burr. Well, let's test it out and see if we got anywhere. Now, since it's so soft, it's not going to be nearly as razor sharp as something like a high quality, high carbon steel, but let's see if it can cut paper at least. Well, it's a little rough, didn't get all the way through, but that's definitely pretty sharp, I'd say, for raw iron. It cuts. And it won't cut for long. This steel is literally, I kid you not, like a hard wood. Like, that's how I would compare it to. It's super soft. That being said, I got both knives pretty sharp, and that completes this project. I am super thankful to be able to work on this project. I think the stories behind these are so fascinating, and I'm super honored to have been trusted to work on these. And I hope you enjoyed watching, and God bless.